Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Vajjana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vajjana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa Padavijacharya Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Padavijacharya Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamadiriyet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, we should offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and unto Srila Prabhupada, the translator, commentator, and our spiritual master. Nashta Prayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavad-gita shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. By regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering devotional service to the pure devotee, all that is inauspicious within the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotion to the Supreme Lord who is glorified in the best of songs is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 12th day of October 2022 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in Canto 6, Prescribed Duties for Mankind. Chapter 1, The History of the Life of Ajamil. Text number 37. Shri Vishnu Duta Uchuhu Yuyam Vai Dharmarajasya Yadi Nirdesha Kadinaha Bruta Dharmasya Nastatvam Yat Chadharmasya Lakshanam. It's not 37?
That is 37.
Oh, that is 37.
38.
And I'm looking at 30. I did 38. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, let's try it again. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Ukte Yamadutais Te Vasudevokta Kadinaha Than Pratyuchuhu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Kira. Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tam Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Shuka Uvacha
Ityukte
Dutaiste
Vasudevoktakarinaha
Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Oh, what happened? You make a mistake? Oh, Vasudevokta, not Vasudevokta. Big difference. Okay, just remember it. We don't have to change it. He wants to change it. Who's next? Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Pratyuchu Prahasyedam Megha Niradaya Gira. Go, Belen, you want to try? Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchupahasjedam Niradayagira Sri Shugovacha Ityukte Yamadutaiste Vasudevoktakarinaha Tan Pratyuchupahasjedam Meganir Radhayagira. Sri Shuka Uvacha. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, Iti, thus, Ukte, being addressed, Yamadutai, by the messengers of Yamaraj, Te, they, Vasudeva, Uktakarinaha, who are always ready to execute the orders of Lord Vasudeva, being personal associates of Lord Vishnu, who have obtained the liberation of Salokya. Tan, unto them, Pratyuchuhu, replied, Prahasya, smiling, Idam, this, Meganir Radaya, resounding like a rumbling cloud, Gira, with voices. Translation. Shukadev Goswami continued, being thus addressed by the messengers of Yamaraj, the servants of Vasudeva smiled and spoke the following words in voices as deep as the sound of rumbling clouds. Purport. The Yamadutas were surprised to see that the Vishnudutas, although polite, were hindering the rule of Yamaraj. Similarly, the Vishnudutas were also surprised that the Yamadutas, although claiming to be servants of Yamaraj, the supreme judge of religious principles, were unaware of the principles of religious action. Thus the Vishnudutas smiled, thinking, what is this nonsense they are speaking? If they are actually servants of Yamaraj, they should know that Jamil is not a suitable candidate for them to carry off. So I'm going to read the next one too myself. Text 38. Shri Vishnu Duta Uchuhu Yuyam Vai Dharmarajasya Yadi Nirdeshakarinaha Bruta Dharmasya Nastatvam Yat Cha Dharmasya Lakshanam. Translation. The blessed messengers of Lord Vishnu, the Vishnu Dutas, said, if you are actually servants of Yamaraj, you must explain to us the meaning of religious principles and the symptoms of irreligion. Purport. This inquiry by the Vishnu Dutas to the Yamadutas is most important. A servant must know the instructions of his master. The servants of Yamaraj claim to be carrying out his orders, and therefore the Vishnu Dutas very intelligently ask them to explain the symptoms of religious and irreligious principles. A Vaishnava knows these principles perfectly well because he is well acquainted with the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Lord says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekang Sharanam Braja. Give up all other varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. Close quote. Therefore, surrender unto to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the actual principle of religion. Those who have surrendered to the principles of material nature instead of to Krishna are all impious, regardless of their material position. Unaware of the principles of religion, they do not surrender to Krishna, and therefore they are considered sinful rascals, the lowest of men, and fools bereft of all knowledge. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, just the same verse we've just been studying the last couple of days, 7:15. I'll say, you say, Namam duskritano mudha papadyante naradama maya parita jnana asadam bhavamashita. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. Close quote. One who has not surrendered to Krishna does not know the true principle of religion. Otherwise he would have surrendered. The question posed by the Vishnu Dutas was very suitable. One who represents someone else must fully know that person's mission. The devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement must therefore be fully aware of the mission of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. Otherwise they will be considered foolish. All devotees, especially preachers, must know the philosophy of Krishna consciousness so as not to be embarrassed and insulted when they preach. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara. So this is a important passage here where the Yamadutas were aghast. They were surprised because apparently it had never happened before, that no one had purely chanted the holy name who was so sinful that they were scheduled to take them to the hellish planets, to Yamaraj for judgment in the hellish planets. But the other side to this is that you wonder, was Yamaraj remiss in training up his dutas? Because later on, we're going to get some instruction from Yamaraj, and he warns him, whatever you do, don't approach anyone who chants the holy name, you know. Just avoid them completely. So, was it so rare that people were chanting the holy name that they... Anyway, the point is that what's so important is that we're now going to get a very nice description from the Yamadutas of the law as it stands, except for the clause of the devotees and chanting the holy name, because they are well versed in the ordinary doings of the law, and people, and those who are very sinful certainly should be taken away. And they give a summary of the law and from the Vedas and from the Manusmriti and so forth. But as Maharaj pointed out, this is a special power, the power of the holy name, especially in this age. This wasn't in the modern age, but Lord Chaitanya has made it available to all, that we're not going to be able to follow that Manusmriti. Have you ever read it? I mean, these things, wow, if they try to insert that in ISKCON, forget about it, you know. But the wonderful thing about it, we don't have to. We can, if we accept, as Prabhupada mentions in the previous purport, the main instruction from Krishna, the summary instruction at the end of the Bhagavad-gita. Sarva dharmam parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam savapapebhyo mokshayasyami mastricha. Just give up all the dharmas and surrender only unto me. Your sins I'll nullify, O Arjun. From anxiety be free. Which is exactly pertinent to this. Because Ajamil, to a large extent, not totally, he wasn't on his way back to Godhead from this, but he had surrendered by constantly chanting that holy name. And it's not just that he chanted once at the end there. He was always calling to the little boy Narayan, who I get the impression he's, 4 or 5, because he would call him over when he wanted to eat something, and so forth. He wasn't just lying in a bassinet somewhere. And as is mentioned, they're just irresistibly cute and attractive at that age. It's almost built in. It's a genetic thing, because if they're so helpless that if they weren't able to evoke, in normal people anyway, the love of the parents who want to protect them, then there'd be no generation after generation. Even in animals, you see the same thing. The cats are taking care of their kittens, and the birds are taking care of their little birdlets, whatever. And so that's essential. But the great exception here is that because of his previous life, because of his upbringing, he named that boy Narayan. And so when he's calling Narayan his boy, he's also calling the original Narayan, and that's counting. And so really he was sinless at the end there, because he was constantly calling him. And he especially called in great desperation, the name. And because he wasn't calling to Narayan, to relieve him of the sin. He was calling to his boy. So therefore, it wasn't pure chanting, but it was offenseless chanting. He wasn't trying to use the holy name in order to excuse all the sins he had done. That wasn't in his mentality. He was just calling out to his boy in helplessness, and that evoked the mercy of Narayan, and he sent his duties in an instant. And now we have this wonderful interaction where we're going to be able to learn what the real Dharma is, what the real power of the holy name is. So it's being set up here. And Prabhupada says this inquiry by the Vishnudutas to the Yamadutas is most important. So this is also an instruction for all of us who are serious, about following Krishna consciousness and helping others to become Krishna conscious. You soon learn in the Hare Krishna movement that there's these two tracks which are actually shown by Lord Chaitanya. I like to bring this up. When you begin reading this Chaitanya Charitamrita, this Mangalacharan, the introductory verses, they describe Lord Chaitanya, that the Panchatattva there. There's verses about Nityananda and Advaita, and all of these are covered, and then they're later explained in the Adi Leela mostly, and expanded upon in later chapters of the book. But it's very quick when you read the first few verses there. First of all, it's the second verse, I think it is, that defines Lord Chaitanya. The third. Yadadvaitam brahmopanashadi tadapyasatanabha yatmantar yami purishahatiso sangsa vibhava shadaishvaraya purno yahiya bhagavan sasvayamaya nachaitanyat krishna jagati padatatvam padamiha. I remember when I was reading this and memorizing it, I said, this is like a foundational, essential verse. If you don't memorize it, that's one thing. But you should know the content of this verse, because the entire existence of the Hare Krishna movement and Lord Chaitanya's movement rests upon the truth of this verse. And what is he saying there? He says that Brahman effulgence, that non-dual substance known as Brahman, is but the effulgence of his body, and the super soul is simply expansion. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya, is the same Krishna, full with 6 opulences. He mentions that also. And I offer my obeisance unto him. So what is the foundation of this movement? First of all, that Krishna is God, and Lord Chaitanya is Krishna. Krishna is God in the fullest sense, the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead, full with 6 opulences, and Lord Chaitanya is him. I remember when I first started working for the Back to Godhead magazine, and soon came up, someone had written an article about Lord Chaitanya being an incarnation of Krishna. No, we don't use that language. He's not an incarnation of Krishna. He's Krishna himself. And that's the idea, that they're identical. But Lord Chaitanya is Krishna. He's covered that natural bluish, blackish complexion with his golden complexion, which he got from Radharani. He's in the mood of Srimati Radharani. And it's Krishna with this very esoteric understanding that he's taking the role of his best devotee so that he can understand her love for him and his glories through her love and the pleasure she enjoys by being loved by him and loving him. And so much of the CC, of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially in the Yanchi Leela, we see how he's relishing that for 12 years in Puri. So how does that pertain to us? So it's then described in few words. I won't go through the whole Sanskrit thing, although they're very wonderful. But how he had an external and an internal reason for coming. Krishna did, coming as Lord Chaitanya. The internal reason I just described, to relish himself from Radharani's point of view. But he also had the mission of spreading the Sankirtan movement. In other words, out of compassion. And he showed that most obviously when his South Indian tour, when he was, after taking sannyas. He did it also in Navadvip, of course, always spreading the holy name. But meeting one after another, having so many interactions and converting so many and saving thousands would come. It was almost like a pandemic, a good pandemic. People would catch prema. He would be dancing down the road, and people would see him, and they would immediately. It was so potent. They would go back to their villages, and people would see them and catch it. And this is how he's spreading love of God. We don't have that potency, But we can be his representatives. in spreading the chanting of the holy name and the deep philosophy that comes behind it, because he founded this mission on the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the foundational book of philosophy, the ripened fruit of the tree of all the Vedas, which is the essential text, the pramana for all that we believe. Maharaj was talking about the Sandarbhas. I remember I got to work on the Tattva Sandarbha, the one that was going to be published by the BBT first before Gopis came out. And it was such a wonderful experience, realizing here Jiva Goswami is systematically explaining why the Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate pramana, the ultimate source of what we accept as true and to guide our lives. That's what pramana means, to give you all these prameyas, which is, Krishna is God, and all the things about his energies and everything that we understand from Prabhupada's books. So, it's a very, very deep philosophy. Jiva Goswami is recognized even by Westerners as the greatest philosopher, one of the greatest philosophers, who ever lived. And very systematically and composed these sandarbhas, and also wrote wonderful, rasa books like the Gopal Champu, which has all these songs. I'll give you an example. There's one song I memorized from there, and I was inspired to memorize first this one verse from the song by visiting Alatra. I used to visit there twice a year for 20 years. Hopefully I'll get to go. Then it stopped with the pandemic. And then, 10 years ago, they installed the Krishna Balaram. 2010, okay, 12 years. And it's so fabulous. They're so, touching. And they have, because in Alachua they have so much land, they have so many devotees growing flowers for the deities, they're always dressed. We have on Sunday, Maharaj arranges, they're beautiful flowers, and they're always beautiful. But the opulence of the flowers. And so I said, oh, that's just like this verse from this song. And which I knew, but I hadn't memorized, so I memorized it. So I'll give you a sample of this. Is Jiva Goswami's flawless Sanskrit. And he would write, and he would just write it into stone. There's no erasure or anything with him. Like he didn't, it all came out. He was so amazingly erudite. So this is the way the song, this one verse of the song. And this song is based on the Venu-Gita chapter. So it's the gopis singing these songs. So this is describing Krishna Balaram. In the actual Venu-Gita, the first two verses, they mention Krishna Balaram, then it's all about Krishna. Because they say, well, maybe the elders are listening, so we better just sing about Krishna Balaram. But then after that they go, except for Hantaya Madhya, the one about Govardhana, and it's about Krishna Balaram again. But here, they're all about Krishna Balaram. It says, how's it go? Mala mala padimala sadesham. Now I'm not singing it, I don't have the raga down, and I'm sure I'm going too fast. But this is the way I learned it. Mala mala padimala sadesham. It rhymes. And the bees play a very important role in this song. The bees this is the one, So what it means, mala mala. So here's Krishna Balaram wearing these beautiful garlands, forest garlands, which are so fragrant, you can imagine, And so, not only that, but then there's these volleys. Now, Kushakrata Prabhu, who translated this, he didn't know all the meanings of this volley. Volley usually means a wrinkle. That doesn't make sense. So volley here means the application, just like we have the little Q-tip that we can get the fragrance that they're offering to the deities. So there's a little instrument that Mother Yashoda and Rohini have to apply these wonderful fragrances to their Krishna Balaram's body. So they not only have the mala, which is giving us incredible fragrance, and the native fragrance of their bodies, which is also mesmerizing, intoxicating, but now they have these other fragrances. So that's all like a big aura of fragrance wherever they go in the forest. So the bees are maddened, Wherever they are, there's maddened bees. But they're not just bees buzzing. They're singing stutis and prayers and wonderful shlokas. So that's what this verse is about. So this is Jiva Goswami, the great philosopher, wrote that. So back to the what's happening here. So Lord Chaitanya had these two reasons for appearing. One was the internal, one was the external. The external was why we're sitting here. because he to spread the chanting of the holy name and the science of bhakti as he taught it to Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, and they in turn gave us their books headed by Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and so many others, which is really what informs all of these purports, all of the Prabhupada's translation, and it's all coming down to us. So that's all out of mercy, out of compassion for us. And at the same time, he had his own reasons. So we also can reflect that in our own practice of devotional service. We should want to become advanced in devotion. That's important. Otherwise, why would Rupa Goswami write this Upadeshamrita, the essence of all advice? It's all about the step-by-step, First, you have to pick out a guru. The first verse is describing, is to be free, Vacho Vega, Manasakota Vega. And then, the do's and the don'ts. First comes the don'ts, like Yama Niyama. Yama Raja says what you don't do, And so the Yamas are, Atyahara Priyasas Cha Pajalpo Niyamagra. Janasangas Chadalyanta Shadbi Bhakti Pranashyati. Overeating, over-collecting, and hard work for material things, straining. Nonsense talk, hearing it and speaking it. Niyamagraha, this one breaks up into two. One is neglecting the ordinary rules and regulations of devotional service, or just going through the motions. You're there, but you're really not there. You don't have your heart in it. This is also Niyamagra. Janasanga, association with materialists, and laulyam. Now there's a good laulyam, but there's also a material laulyam. This is a material laulyam, which means greed. Even if you can't have something, you still try to, you really want more and more of something, for sense gratification. So these things have to be avoided if you want to advance in devotional service. And indeed it says too much of this will destroy a little tender creeper we're trying to cultivate. And then there's the positive. Utsahan, nishtaya dharyat tat karma pavartanat sangatyagat sato vritte shadbi bhakti prasidyati. Enthusiasm, determination, and patience. Anything you want to achieve in this material world, you have to have that. You have to have, if you want to learn the Mridanga drum, say, well, you have to be enthusiastic. You have to be inspired to want to do it. And you have to be determined. I was never determined enough to do it, because it wasn't a necessity. When I joined, we had 6 or 8 skilled drummers already in the temple. So I was specializing in dancing and chanting. But I always had the rhythm, and that came out in the shlokas. So utsahan nishtaya, determination, with enthusiasm, determination, and patience. Because it's easy to get fired up about something and then say, I can't do it, and then you give it up, but patience. And then tat karma pravartanat. In other words, these 3 are applied in reference to the activities that we do. You have to be enthusiastic for the kirtan, the prasadam. Most people begin with the enthusiasm. That's okay, But you have to also be enthusiastic to want to do menial services like the pots. That was like the basic surrender, and then going out doing books. If you can become determined and you become enthusiastic for that, then you can advance nicely. And then notice sangha tyagat. This is both in the don'ts and in the do's. In the don'ts it says don't associate with the materialists. And in the do's it says, give up association with the materialists. Sangha tyagat. And then satovritte, following in the steps of the acharyas, those who've come before. So these are all very important. I'm not going to go through all 11, but they're all essence of all advice. Especially the first 8. Then it gets very esoteric, going to Vrindavan. That's also important. But these, and culminating in, we used to chant these first 8 in New York, when I lived there in '79 in the big building. The book had just come out, and so after each Bhagavatam class, we would chant them all, so we memorized them nicely. So Prabhupada wants us to know this. Just like he's saying here, these Vishnu Dutas, they're smiling, and basically because the Yamadutas, they're now going to give them a whole description, but they leave out the most essential part about the power of the holy name. In other words, they know the law, but they don't know that special clause in the law, in which you can become free from sinful reactions. And therefore, they're making a big mistake here by trying to arrest Jamil and take him off. So this is Prabhupada brings out these important points here. So a Vaishnava knows the principles real principles we live in perfectly well because he's well acquainted with the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is why Prabhupada was so eager and anxious, you would say even, to get his Srimad Bhagavad-gita printed. Because the Bhagavad-gita is the basic law book for, bhakti, for human beings. And he was really at war with those who had published the Bhagavad-gita but hadn't really given the right interpretation, or they gave the wrong interpretation and distorted it. This is like someone, who's responsible for enforcing the law, whether he's a judge or a policeman or whatever. And they've distorted the law, so they're enforcing it, but it's not the real law. In other words, they're respected as lawgivers or people who are judging the law, but they're using it for some ulterior purpose. This is what Prabhupada saw with all of these other translations of the Bhagavad-gita. So he was so eager to get the Bhagavad-gita out. And it was practically miraculous the way the first one was printed, the abridged edition. I'll tell this story. This is an amazing story. You have to visualize, here's this little storefront, The income basically relies on two people who have jobs. Satsrup Maharaj and Rupanuga, I think, had a job also. Brahmananda also was working for a while before he came in. So there was practically no other way to, and whatever donations they could get at the meetings, which are a couple of bucks, and everything's going very, miraculously. So then Prabhupada had produced the manuscript for the Bhagavad-gita. We're talking like 67, like that. And he gave Brahmananda the task of getting it published. What to do? He went to this one, that one, this one. No one was interested, And then he got a letter from someone who was working in Macmillan, which is a big international publisher. They have, of course, a big office in New York. And he told Prabhupada about it and said, what should I do? Should I send him a copy of the Gita or something like that? So Prabhupada said, no. You go, you take the manuscript with you and visit personally, right?
That record that had come out.
The record? That's what it was.
And Prabhupada said, take it personally.
Yeah. So he had heard about the record. This was also another miracle. I won't get into how that record got made. The night before, there was no mridangas. Prabhupada had little drums. So some fellow walks into the storefront with a mridanga. Where did that come from? I know where it came from, because I used to live down there at that time. There was a place called the Paradox Restaurant, which is famous, right? That's in the Lilamrita. But what that doesn't mention is that right next to the Paradox Restaurant was a Indian music instrument store. Ravi Shankar had become very popular in the mid-'60s in Indian music, and George Harrison and everything, So there were Scientologists. So I walked in there one time, and a guy tried to give me an engram, Oh, God. What I avoided, New York was full of all of these things. So and there was a store with all of these Indian music. Where else were they going to come from? He must have gotten it from that store. Anyway, here's this guy. He's not a devotee. He just was interested. He had heard the kirtan. He walked in, and Prabhupada said, his eyes lit up. Give me the drum. So I gave him the drum, and he starts playing super excellently. And the devotee said, "Oh, Prabhupada, just another miracle. Prabhupada's so expert at this. To this day, he's always the best player." But it wasn't our drum. So the guy wanted to leave. Said, well, we're going to have a recording tomorrow morning. If you could bring it back and we could borrow it. Said, okay, so they never thought he'd come back. But he did. He came back. And that's the drum that's on that wonderful first album, which made its way to George Harrison. He's floating off in some yacht or something off the Greek islands, right, on vacation. And he's listening to that again and again and again and again and again. Anyway, Krishna definitely had his hand in these things. So, but meanwhile, Prabhupada is working on his Gita. So he tells him, okay, so did he take an album? Yeah. He took an album, and maybe and he went to visit the guy. And he thought, maybe he's an executive. Turned out to be a little clerk, You know, I said, okay, great. So he found the guy and he's talking with him, you know, and one of the editors walks in and he says, well, what's your name? He says, well, I'm Brahmananda, you know, or Bhakti Bruce, I don't know. And we have a Bhagavad-gita that we need to print. Oh, Bhagavad-gita? That's just what we need. We've been looking for one. And they agreed to print it. But it was like a 900-page manuscript, so they said, well, we can't print that whole thing. We'll print an abridged version, which they did. And it had, I won't get into it too much, but it had the introduction. I think Allen Ginsberg wrote something, Denise Levertov, who was very big at the time, Thomas Merton, who was huge. He was very popular in those days. He was a monk.
Probably the most famous Catholic, except for
Yeah, amazing. You know, he wrote an introduction, so that helped to sell the book. Anyway, so then a few years later, he was able to print on a bridge. There's a picture of him getting one, the first version. He's in complete ecstasy, you see. So because it's the law book, even though there are so many mistakes and this and that, you know, editing and this and that, but it was tremendously important, and it was very important for enlivening Prabhupada. And it became, you know, as time went on, I remember when I joined, that was, you know, being there for the morning program and the evening program was the law. If you want to live in the temple, that's it, you know. Morning program was Bhagavatam. We had like 2.5 cantos at that time. The third canto I was working on as a proofreader. And of course we had the Ishopanishad, and we had the teachings of Lord Chaitanya was also extremely important. When I first joined, I got the Krishna book, you know. But I was coming from kind of more impersonal. It was too much. It was too much Leela for me, you know. But when I got to TLC, it was all philosophy, you know. It was really fascinating. And I love that book. So anyway, that became an evening class with Bhagavad-gita and a little reading from Nectar of Devotion. And it was you know, so important. It just grounded you in the philosophy. You know, and Prabhupada's purport so important. You understood why and behind all of these things that we're doing, the chanting and the deities and things like that. And when you spoke, you know, devotees who were giving classes, they were quoting verses by that time, and it was impressive. So Prabhupada wants us to study these books systematically. That's why he started this. He encouraged, you know, the Bhakti Shastri, which is based on the Gita and the NOD and the Ishopanishad, I believe. There may be another book in there. And then gradually there's another series, you know. So you can become well-versed, and then when you meet somebody, you can speak with authority and you know, because you're also experiencing the benefit of the philosophy. And people become interested in reading the book, you know, and this is the way the movement spreads. So we need to know why we're doing what we're doing. And the philosophy behind it, and the details of the sadhana that we perform, and also it's nice to read of the different stages, what you can look forward to and what you can aspire to, you know, trying to give up the offenses, what not to do, like you know, in my editing. You read the Nectar of Devotion. There's 64 offenses against the deity, you know, and one is to spread your legs, you know, before the deity. And I said, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious, you know. Yeah, okay, but that's not what Prabhupada meant. Spreading your legs toward the deity is pointing them, sitting here and pointing your legs to the deity. That's the spreading your legs to the deity. That's what it is. And this whole thing of Ganesh, the devotees should worship Ganesh. This is actually, which we have Ganesh now, which he blesses the temple, you know, he helps get rid of the anarthas, that's for sure, the obstacles. But there is a line in there where devotees can worship Ganesh, and Prabhupada never instituted that. What it says is, this is within the notes that Jiva Goswami wrote, edition, that the pujaris, before they worship, should worship with the deity, should worship Ganesh. You know, but Prabhupada never instituted, so it's not necessary for us to do it. But that's where that comes in. So these details that come out as time goes on. But that's the you know, the fine details of the process of devotional services there in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and these different stages you go through, and also wonderful shlokas and descriptions of Krishna's 64 qualities, and then examples of each quality. You know. I mean, that you can see how you can't not become Krishna conscious if you read that and discuss it. There was a devotee in LA, and I forget his name now. He would always carry in a little bag a nectar of devotion. And he would come up to the devotee just sort of lounging around, or nothing. Hey, Babu, you want to hear something really nice? And he'd pull out the nectar of devotion, and he'd read it to you. That's what Prabhupada wanted. I remember reading, because Bhanu Swami has translated the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, given all of the Sanskrit and description and commentary. And one of the verses it's very, very appropriate for this time of year, because he has a section in there which we can read, because it enhances our appreciation for the baby lila, for the Vatsalya Ras, Mother Yashoda. So this is describing that mood. So he says, and you're like, I don't know if you know the name of this meter, and I don't know it, but it's I know what it is. It's Bhishma's meter, the Bhishma's prayers. Kinkani kalapam smitamukamudranasika gramuktam. Kadadatandabanit pindamangre tanayamavekshananandananda patni. You can learn this one, Daniel. I'll teach it to you. He's into the Sanskrit. He likes the Sanskrit. So kvanata means sounding very sweetly. Kanaka is gold. Kinkani is the waist bells. Kalapa means the series of waist bells, the string of waist bells. So as he's crawling toward his mother, these golden waist bells are tinkling very sweetly. Kvanata kanaka kinkani kalapan smita mukam. His face is smiling. He's smiling with his mother, and at his mother, she's seeing him. Smita mukam ujjvala nasika gramuktam. And on the tip of his nose, he has a fulgent pearl affixed. And that's all he's wearing. He's got that pearl, and he's got those waist bells. And he's crawling toward his mother. And what is he doing? Kata Dhritandavanita Pindam. In his hand, he's holding a fresh butterball. Now, isn't this, there's probably 200 million murtis of this in India, right? On the altars. That little Bal Krishna crawling toward his mother. So this is the description of it. So just think of this one word. Her name is Nanda Patni because she's the wife of Nanda Maharaj. But Nananda is a word I never heard before, means to, and this is a word we should incorporate in ISKCON, ecstasize. It's an English word. I discovered it. Not a very common word, but we need that word. It means to go into ecstasy or to make someone else go into ecstasy. So she's exercising his mother. So Nananda Nanda Patni. Just see the beautiful euphony of that verse. So this is the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and so many other literatures. The Bhagavatam itself is known to be such high Sanskrit poetry. Wonderful example of the prayers of the gopis and the prayers of the personified Vedas. I mean, this is heavy philosophy. You mentioned you like that Malini meter. I don't know the name of this meter, but it's amazing. I remember last time we went through, I think we're on our second trip through the Bhagavatam since I've been here. It takes quite a few years to get there. We came to the 87th chapter of the 10th canto. This board would never be long enough, big enough. The letters would be like 10 point. This is the longest meter. So I memorized several, but now I just remember one of them. But here's the meter. Tvadanupattam kalai minamatma surit priyavat chadatitaton maketi te priya atmanicha nabadadamantaho sadupasanayatmahano yadunushayabhrame hurubaye kushariyadipata. This whole thing is like a little paper of philosophy in this one verse. So what they're praying for, but I told someone, this is kind of a joke, is that because these prayers are being offered by these personified Vedas, the Upanishads personified, to Mahavishnu before he wakes up at the creation. So the creation hasn't really come yet, And so I said, before there was even any creation of this world, there was jazz. And Bilvamangal Thakur, he has at least one verse that I know of in the Karnamrita. So now I have to give the translation for those two verses. So first the philosophy verse. The personified Veda offers Svadanupatam Kulayam. Now this is the word Kulayam for body. Who would ever know? What does that mean? You know, the Gopi Puranadhara. He wrote the commentary for that. When you read that chapter in the 10th canto, when you get to it, he wrote it wholly and solely. That's the last 10 chapters he wrote by himself. I mean, he condensed the already voluminous commentary. You know, from that Krishna book, when you're reading it, you get to that chapter, it's like half the book. You know, because Prabhupada is translating that commentary. Yeah. So Tvadanubitams, my dear Lord, the human form of body is perfectly designed and perfectly suitable for serving you. And when one takes up the service, then the body and the mind and the senses become their best friend and very dear, just like the paraphernalia for service. You know, like we have a little place where we wash the paraphernalia. You know, it's all sacred because it's used for Krishna. So your whole body becomes sacralized. So, but alas, and those who do not take their pleasure in serving, and then he says, and as far as you're concerned, you're guiding from inside and very happy as a super soul, so everything is very wonderful. But those who don't worship you, who don't take pleasure in worshiping you, and then he has this immortal line, Asadupasana yatmahano. Asadupas, they worship the temporary, they worship the dead matter. Atmahano, which is virtual suicide for the soul. Asadupasana yatmahano. What's their fate? You know, Yadanusha Yabbrame, they keep wandering in this world, taking on very fearful and bad bodies and suffering like anything. Alas, the last word is alas. You know, so this is really the philosophy in a nutshell. Is that those who, if we use our body, mind, words, intelligence, everything we have, and connect them to Krishna by devotional service, then our life becomes very auspicious and blissful. But if we don't learn how to take our pleasure there, then we try to take pleasure in sense gratification, and then our destination is Yamadutas will come eventually and come and take us back. So this is the and Prabhupada took that philosophy and he gave all the commentary in his Krishna book. Just by reading that one book, he says even one chapter, one page, one line, one word, you could become delivered by reading his Krishna book. So he gave us so much. So we should have these two lines in our sadhana. That we want to become advanced, and therefore we should follow very carefully the do's and the don'ts. But at the same time, we should feel compassion and care for those who haven't heard about Krishna, who may be open. Searching out those people who can respond to an invitation to the lounge or whatever. Take a book, of course. Somehow or other, spread the word, as long as we have our facilities, as long as we have our, we can speak and think and move and do the things that we do. And that's the auspicious path back home, back to Godhead. Because they're not separated. If you make the effort to give Krishna consciousness to others, Krishna says there's no devotee more dear to me than him. So you get more inspiration and more taste in your own personal sadhana. So Prabhupada wants us, as he says in here, that we should not be dull brain. We should learn the philosophy. We have the opportunity to read, attend the classes. We can even take the courses. They're online now, and systematically learn these books. And then our own faith will deepen by that also. Our faith in the process, in our ability to do it, because Krishna will help. He helps us. It's not just our own effort that's involved in this. So I'm sorry I went over time. Does anyone have any comments or questions on these points? Some of these points? Bhakti Saul. Or was he just stretching?
Hare Krishna. You mentioned what they call them. We should study the books systematically. I was just going to wonder if you could name the systematic order we should study them in.
Well, Prabhupada, he said, yes, the Bhagavad-gita is the basic ABCs. And then the Bhagavatam is graduate, and CC is postgraduate study. But it's not that we should never open this Chaitanya Charitamrita until we've read and become well-versed in the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then we'll never read it. But we should really study and systematically learn Bhagavad-gita. And then there's these the nectar of devotion. They're all important. And we have our Gita class. I've been holding together for 30 years, and you're one of the main people who tries to make it if your schedule allows. But we can inquire the whole Bhakti Shastri idea, which I unfortunately never been able to find time to take myself, which is a prerequisite for. I remember sitting next to, I had Bhadri Ryan Maharaj come to my apartment, and he was doing the answers to the Bhakti Shastri, because it's prerequisite to sannyas in ISKCON, and I was supposed to watch, make sure he didn't cheat. I just went about my business and kept doing what I was doing. He did have a couple of books up. No, I'm just kidding. No, he didn't. Forgive me. But if you want to do it, it'll open up. We can make it available for you. Go ahead, Prabhu.
Just had a short comment. I guess you could say the other side of the Macmillan miracle was a few years later when they came out with the unabridged, right, which you mentioned. I grew up in a town with like less than 5,000 people, just a little town, and there was one bookstore in the town, and it was there, that's where I got my first Bhagavad-gita as it is unabridged, and that means basically the reach of Macmillan at that time must have been like every town and village.
Yeah. It was a major international publisher for sure. Yeah.
So it really
in fact, I think they may have swallowed Collier at a certain point because it became Collier Macmillan. The first one was published by Collier, and then the second one was published by Macmillan. But then you look on the little Collier, and there's Collier Macmillan. So there are people. Yeah, they're huge. No, it was Krishna definitely. You look at Prabhupada's, especially those early years. There's so many steps with Krishna is really stepping in here, and he's allowing it, encouraging, giving him so much facility. It's amazing. Okay. All right. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol. Bhagavad Gita class tonight. Hare Krishna.